Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're diving into something pretty incredible.
Yeah.
We're looking at an etching from the Houston artist Bob Camblin.
Okay.
Called, it's actually two pieces presented as one, Fish and Anonymous.
Wow.
And on one side, we have this very intricate underwater scene with a fish swimming beneath these perched birds.
Mm.
And the detail is incredible. It's almost like photorealistic. I
Right.
mean, you almost feel like you could reach out and touch the scales and the
Yeah.
feathers, but right next to it,
Uh-huh.
we have this very stark monolith under a full moon.
It's like night and day. Literally, one side is teeming with life, and then the other is this very minimalist, almost haunting image.
Yes, exactly. And it's that contrast that I think really grabbed me. And we have some fascinating sources to try to unpack all the layers here.
Okay.
We have some art criticism, a little bit of Zen Buddhism, even dipping into the I Ching.
So what's so fascinating to me is that, like, Camblin isn't just playing with aesthetics. It's like he's inviting us to think about the duality of existence.
Yeah.
You know, the seen and unseen action and stillness. It's almost like a visual representation of everyday enlightenment, which we see explored in that first article you shared.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
Before we get too deep into the philosophical side, though, I am curious about the technique itself.
Okay.
The etching, it feels very classic and modern at the same time.
Right. It's etching, which has roots going back centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But the way Camblin uses line and texture,
Yeah.
it almost links to movements like 19th century symbolism and even hints of surrealism.
I can see that. And of course, those movements were all about exploring the subconscious, the dreamlike, using symbolism to get a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
Are there any artists from that era whose work you think feels similar to Camblin's?
Definitely Odilon Redden comes to mind.
Okay.
He was a master at blending nature with these almost fantastical, sometimes eerie atmospheres. There's that same sense of mystery, you know, of hinting at something beyond the surface.
So Camblin's etching, in a way, it's part of this larger conversation about art as a way to explore deeper symbolic realms.
Absolutely. And that's where the Zen interpretation gets really interesting.
Okay.
Think about those two sides, you know, the fish and birds versus the monolith.
I'm seeing it as almost like two worlds.
Yes.
One is bustling with life, and then the other is so still and contemplative.
Exactly. And in Zen thought, there's this concept of the duality of existence and non-existence.
Okay.
The left side with the fish and birds embodies that flow of life, the tangible world. That's the realm of samsara, which is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
So the fish represents being caught in that cycle, that constant movement and change.
Yes, but it's not necessarily negative.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of existence. The birds, on the other hand,
Okay.
they offer a glimpse of something else. They hint at the possibility of enlightenment, of rising above the cycle.
And the monolith represents that state of enlightenment.
It points to the void, the emptiness, or sunyata in Buddhist terms. It's not about nothingness in like a bleak way.
Right.
It's about recognizing the impermanence of everything, which can actually be very freeing.
So how does understanding sunyata practically help someone in their everyday life? Wouldn't that just make them nihilistic?
Not at all.
Okay.
In fact, understanding the impermanence of things can actually help you appreciate the present moment more. It encourages you to let go of attachments that cause suffering.
Okay.
It's about finding peace in the midst of change, which is essentially what everyday enlightenment is all about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like instead of being afraid of change, you learn to flow with it.
Exactly. And that brings us to the I Ching,
Okay.
which, you know, is an ancient Chinese text used for divination. It's full of wisdom about how to navigate life's changes. One hexagram that really resonates with the fish and birds is water over heaven, also known as Wei Ji.
Weiji.
It represents incompletion or transition, the ever-changing nature of things.
I see the connection there. The fish and birds are always moving, always in flux. Nothing stays still. So where does the monolith fit in with the I Ching?
The monolith symbolizes mountain, or Zhen, which embodies stillness and meditation. It's interesting how Camblin chose to pair these two contrasting ideas.
It's like he's saying that even in the midst of all that change and movement,
Yeah,
there's a need for stillness, for contemplation, for grounding ourselves.
exactly. The message here is about balance. And that resonates so strongly with that first article on everyday enlightenment.
Right.
The idea that it's not about escaping the world, but about finding that equilibrium within it.
This is all starting to connect for me, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, There was one thing in that YouTube video, the duality of realms, nature and mystery, that I found really interesting.
Yes, the way the video connects the etching to the concept of duality is quite insightful.
Yeah.
And that's actually a perfect segue into our next point.
The video, The Duality of Realms, it really dives deep into that idea of duality.
Yeah.
Which we've been kind of dancing around already.
Right.
With this etching. And it argues that Camblin's piece, it really captures that interplay of opposites, like on a profound level.
What's fascinating about that video is how it ties the etching to the concept of samsara and nirvana in Buddhism. You remember we talked about samsara being that cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and nirvana being that ultimate liberation.
So like the fish swimming endlessly, that's samsara. And the monolith represents reaching nirvana.
Exactly. The video points out how the left side with the fish and birds embodies the dynamism of samsara. The water and air represent movement and interconnectedness, that constant flow of energy.
Yeah.
It's like a visual metaphor for the cycle itself.
And it's interesting because that side isn't portrayed as a bad thing,
Yeah.
It's beautiful, it's detailed, it's full of life.
Right. Samsara is often associated with suffering, but it's also where we experience joy, love, connection.
Right.
It's the totality of our earthly experience.
So it's not about escaping samsara entirely, but finding a way to exist within it without being totally swept away by the chaos.
That's a great way to put it, and that's where the right side of the etching with the monolith comes in.
Okay.
It represents that stillness, that transcendent awareness that allows us to step back from the cycle, even if just for a moment.
And the video even quotes chapter 16 of the I Ching.
Oh, wow.
Which talks about finding stillness by returning to the source. And it's like that monolith is a visual representation of that source.
Yes.
Right, that unchanging truth beneath all the change.
Precisely. And it's not about denying or rejecting the world of samsara. It's about recognizing that there's more to life than just the constant cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
Yeah.
There's a deeper reality, a deeper truth that lies beyond it.
This reminds me of that quote from the first article, the one about everyday enlightenment being the ability to hold the totality of existence in your heart.
Yeah.
It's like you're holding both the fish and the monolith, the samsara and the nirvana all at once.
That's a beautiful way to connect it back. And that's the power of art. Like, it speaks to us on multiple levels, inviting us to find our own meaning and connect the dots in a way that's personally relevant.
I'm also seeing another duality here with the idea of yin and yang.
Okay.
The fish and birds, all that movement and energy that feels very yang to me. And the monolith, with its stillness and solidity, seems more yin.
Absolutely. The video actually touches on that too.
Okay.
How Camblin's etching can be seen as a representation of yin and yang in perfect balance. Yin with its receptivity, darkness, and stillness, perfectly represented by the monolith, and yang with its energy, light, and movement, captured beautifully in the fish and birds.
It's making me think about how we tend to favor one or the other in our own lives. Like, are you someone who thrives on activity and being social? Or do you crave quiet time and introspection? Maybe that's a question for our listeners to ponder.
It is, and the point isn't necessarily to achieve perfect balance all the time. It's about recognizing the interplay of these forces within ourselves and in the world around us.
And appreciating both, right? Not seeing one is better or worse than the other.
Exactly. It's like that quote from the Tao Te Ching about how being and non-being create each other. There's two sides of the same coin.
So if we go back to that idea of everyday enlightenment, maybe it's about finding that harmony between the yin and yang within ourselves.
I think that's a really insightful observation. It's not about rejecting one aspect of ourselves in favor of the other, but about integrating them both into a more holistic understanding of who we are.
And maybe that's what Camblin is inviting us to do with this etching, to hold both the fish and the monolith, the yin and the yang in our awareness.
To see the interconnectedness of it all, to find the balance in the midst of duality, and to recognize, as the first article so eloquently stated, that enlightenment isn't some distant goal, but a way of being in the world right here, right now.
So how do we bring this down to earth, so to speak?
Yeah.
How can someone actually apply these ideas to their daily life? What would everyday enlightenment look like in practice?
That's a great question, and it's where this concept of koan comes in.
You mentioned koan, and I'll admit I needed to brush up on that one.
Yeah.
It's like a riddle that Zen masters use, right?
Yeah.
Meant to kind of short-circuit your logical mind.
Exactly. A koan is designed to provoke thought, not provide a straightforward answer. And in a way, Camblin's etching functions like a visual koan. We're presented with these contrasting images, these dualities,
right,
and invited to contemplate their meaning without being given a clear solution.
which can be frustrating but also really intriguing.
Yeah.
It forces you to kind of engage with the piece on a deeper level.
Right. It's about the process of inquiry itself, the journey rather than the destination.
Yeah.
And that journey, that continual questioning and seeking, can be seen as a form of everyday enlightenment.
So instead of looking for answers outside of ourselves, we're encouraged to look inward,
Yeah.
to find our own understanding of these concepts.
Precisely. And that's where cultivating a sense of curiosity and openness becomes essential. The ability to hold multiple perspectives, to question our assumptions, to be comfortable with ambiguity. These are all qualities that can help us on that path.
It's interesting how that ties back to that concept of embracing the absurd from the first article.
Yeah.
We talked about finding humor in the unexpected, not taking things too seriously.
Yes. Embracing the absurd is a key element of Zen philosophy.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that life is full of contradictions and paradoxes. Things don't always make sense, and that's okay.
So instead of getting caught up in trying to figure everything out,
Right.
we can learn to appreciate the absurdity of it all.
Exactly, and that can be incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
Allow us to let go of the need to control everything, to loosen our grip on rigid beliefs.
It's like the etching itself. Two contrasting images side by side. The detailed realism of the fish, the abstract mystery of the monolith. It's almost absurd, but it works.
It does, and it reminds us that beauty can be found in unexpected places.
Right.
Even in the midst of contradictions, it's a reminder to embrace the totality of experience.
Yeah.
The light and the shadow, the yin and the yang.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Sure.
what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think this enlightenment isn't some far-off goal or a state of perfection. It's a way of being in the world, a way of seeing, a way of relating to ourselves and everything around us.
And that way of being is something we can cultivate through practices like mindfulness contemplation, embracing the absurd.
Absolutely. And art like Camblin's etching can serve as a powerful tool for that cultivation. It can inspire us, challenge us, and remind us of these truths.
So maybe the next time you're feeling overwhelmed by the chaos of life, take a moment to visualize those contrasting images.
Yeah.
The fish swimming in the depths, the monolith standing silent beneath the moon.
Remember that within you lies both the dynamism of the fish and the stillness of the monolith. And finding that balance, that harmony within, is what everyday enlightenment is all about.
Beautifully put. Thank you for this incredible deep dive. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Until next time, keep diving deep.